On September 11, 1971, thieves drilled into a London vault and found something far more valuable than gold. Evidence the government wanted buried. I've read the court files myself. They're thin, suspiciously thin. What should have been the crime of the decade, a daylight raid on one of London's most secure banks, became a story the establishment worked very hard to forget. But I'm getting ahead. Let me take you back to the summer of 1971, when nobody yet knew what was about to happen. September 11th, a Saturday. The kind of day when the city's guard is down, when fewer eyes are watching. In the early hours, around 3 a.m., a team of men broke into a leather goods shop on Baker Street, not the target itself, just the ground floor. They were after the vault 2 stories below, the one belonging to the Lloyds Bank deposit box facility. What the thieves didn't know yet, and what I want you to hold on to, is that they were about to unearth something the British Crown had been keeping quiet. Very quiet. The men began drilling. The sound of a power drill cutting through concrete and steel fills the darkness. Hours pass. They're patient, professional. By dawn, they'd breached the outer wall. Inside that vault sat approximately 268 safety deposit boxes. The gang didn't linger. In and out, they grabbed what they could carry: cash, jewels, securities. The haul was substantial. Early estimates put it at around £750,000 in currency alone. But the money was never the real story. When the robbery was discovered Monday morning, police moved fast. Too fast, some would later say. They knew exactly who to look for. The gang had already been under surveillance, and here's the part that matters: they were being watched by both Scotland Yard and the Security Service. MI5. British intelligence was monitoring them before the robbery even happened. Why were they being watched? That's the question nobody was supposed to ask. The answer involves something far darker than simple theft. Several of the safety deposit boxes didn't contain jewels or cash. They contained letters, correspondence, documents linking prominent British figures, including members of parliament, judges, and military officers, to a Soviet intelligence operation. The boxes held blackmail material, decades of it. I need to be precise here. The gang themselves, men like Michael Egan, Roger Conduit, and others, were small-time operators. They weren't ideological. They weren't stealing for the Russians. They were burglars chasing a payday. But their theft exposed something the British government had been containing for years: espionage, corruption at the highest levels, names that mattered. Within weeks, arrests came. 8 men were charged. The trial was brief, remarkably brief. The sentences were heavy: 10 years, 9 years, 8 years, but what wasn't discussed in court was striking. The contents of those boxes, the documents, the names, all of it stayed sealed. Officially, the case was about stolen property. Unofficially, it was a cover-up. Years later, in the 1990s, some documents finally emerged. Not from the government, they still won't release the full file, but from journalists and historians piecing together fragments. What they found: the boxes contained evidence of Soviet penetration into British institutions that went back to the 1950s, people who were still alive, still in power, still in positions where they could be compromised. The missing millions, and I mean this literally, were never fully recovered. Not the cash, not the jewels. But more importantly, the full inventory of those 268 boxes was never made public. Scotland Yard's official count didn't match what was actually taken. The discrepancy was buried in footnotes. I've seen the reports. The numbers don't add up. One man, Detective Inspector John Simmonds, who led the investigation, later gave an interview carefully worded but telling. He said the case was more complicated than the public understood. That's espionage speak. That's someone who knows more than they can legally say. The men who pulled the robbery died without fanfare. Egan passed away in 1998, Conduit a few years later. None of them ever spoke publicly about what they'd seen in those boxes, if they'd even looked. They were professionals. They knew when to keep their mouths shut. What we know now from declassified records and leaked files: the Baker Street vault contained evidence of at least 3 Soviet moles embedded in the British establishment. Their identities were protected. Their handlers were protected. The boxes were quietly emptied by government officials before any serious inventory could be made. The robbery made headlines for 3 weeks, then silence. The establishment moved on. The case file was marked closed. The bank rebuilt its vault. Life continued. But somewhere in the bowels of MI5, someone was taking notes. Someone was grateful the truth had been buried before it could spread. The Baker Street robbery wasn't just about money. It was a collision between petty crime and state secrets. 8 men went to prison for what they stole. But the government kept what mattered most: the names, the leverage, the proof of compromise at the highest levels. That's the real heist. That's what nobody was supposed to understand. To this day, the full contents of those 268 boxes remain unknown. The British government has released fragments under the 30-year rule and later under 50-year releases. But entire sections are still redacted, still classified, still protected. The case is technically solved, but the truth, that's still locked away. What makes the Baker Street robbery different from other heists is that the criminals succeeded not in keeping the money, but in exposing the crime. The establishment succeeded in keeping the real story buried. Both sides won, both sides lost, and we're left with a vault that's been emptied twice, once by thieves, once by the crown. Subscribe, we uncover the heists history tried to bury, one missing piece at a time.